A Few Acres of Snow, a new design by Martin Wallace. This is a game that depicts the struggle between the French and the British Empire in North America in the 18th century. It is for 2 players only. A player will be the British, the other player the French, and it is a game that combines board gaming with a deck building engine. This is not the first time that it is done. Victory Points for the Crown came out last summer, and that is a chess variant that also is based on a deck building mechanics. Nevertheless, it is still a relatively new idea. It hasn't been done many times. So let's see how this game handles the challenge of combining a board with a deck building engine. This is a general view of the mounted map at setup. The French player starts with control of a series of towns and cities in this area, and the British player has control of the coast here. Each player also has an initial deck. Each player also starts with a certain amount of money. The British player has more money than the French player, and each player has a pool of towns and villages that will be developed as the game progresses. Each player also has a pool of cards that can be drafted by that player, and there are neutral cards that both players can acquire. You can draft an available card as one of your 2 actions in each turn. You add the card to your discard pile. Sometimes the card can be acquired for free, some of the times you have to pay the printed cost. And some actions complement other actions. For example, the Bateau or the Settlers help you when you're trying to settle in new locations. Other cards create actions by themselves. That is, to play a card for the printed effect is one of the 2 actions that you have available each turn. The Indian Leader, for example, allows you to steal a Native American card from the opponent. The Governor allows you to thin out your deck. The Trader allows you to discard cards that have the first symbol on them, such as this one, and to gain 2 money for each such card. The Home supports the special card. To play the card is a free action, doesn't count against your 2 actions, and that card allows you to draw 3 cards immediately. It is an extremely powerful card. And then you have military cards that I will discuss more in detail later. Another available action regarding card management is to discard cards, because here you do not discard cards automatically at the end of your turn. You only draw if you have less than 5, so sometimes you will have to discard cards to keep your hand effective, and you have to spend an action. Also, it costs a money for each card that you are discarding after the first one, so it is not always an easy decision. Another possible action is to place a card in reserve. Cards that are placed in reserve go to the reserve box on the board. They can be retrieved later, and to retrieve cards is a free action, doesn't count against your 2 actions, but it does cost money. Still, placing the right cards in reserve and retrieving them at the right time is key, because that allows you to execute specific actions that otherwise may be particularly complex or difficult to perform if you're just waiting for the right combination of cards to come to your hand. If you can build that set turn after turn, of course, you're more in control, and that definitely reduces the luck of the draw. A very common and important action is to develop new settlements. Suppose that I want to develop a new settlement in Albany starting from New York. Then I need to play from my hand a card that connects a location that I have to the connection where I want to go. I need to play a card that has the necessary means of transportation to go there, Bateaus in this case, and if the location also has a settler symbol on it, then I also need to add a card with the settler symbol. If I play these 3 cards together, then I am allowed to settle in Albany, and I can place a cube there that represents a village. I also take the corresponding card from the location deck, and I add the card to my discard pile. Later, when the card comes back to my hand, I can use it to execute another action, which is to develop my village into a town. To do so, I play the card corresponding to the village. I play a card with a settler, and then I am allowed to replace my village cube with a town disc. Okay, we have been nice enough. Let's talk about aggressive actions. One such action is the raid. You can perform a raid by playing cards that have the raid capability printed on them. If you play a single raid card, you can raid a location adjacent to one of your own. Suppose that here the French player decides to raid that location, but you can play multiple raid cards at the same time to extend the range of your raid. For example, for 2 cards, you can raid an enemy location which is 2 locations away from one of your own. With these 2 cards, the French player may attempt to raid Albany, yes, because you can also raid past enemy locations. When a raid is launched, the opponent has the opportunity to respond by playing a card that has the ability to block a raid. Usually cards that allow you to launch raids also allow you to block raids, but there are also other cards that have the ability to block a raid. A raid that is not blocked will destroy a village or will reduce a town to a village. And then the disc or the cube that was destroyed will go to the player that performed the raid, and that will give the player victory points at the end of the game. An ambush can be launched and blocked by pretty much the same cards that allow you to block and launch raids. If an ambush is not blocked, the target player loses a card that has that symbol printed on it. The card goes back to the original action deck and can be purchased later, placed in the discard pile, and then used later in the game. So an ambush may not seem like a powerful action per se, because after all, it only slows down the opponent. The opponent can still get that card back at some point, but actually it can be a key action if you time it well and if you launch a successful ambush during a siege, because that may negate reinforcements that the opponent is planning to bring to the siege, and that may be the single factor that makes you win the siege. No blitzkrieg in this time. If you want to attack a location belonging to the opponent, you have to start a siege. To start a siege, you play a card that connects you to the location you're trying to attack. Suppose that the British player is launching an attack against that location. You also have to play a card that allows you to get there, and then you play a military card. When you perform this sequence of actions, you start a siege, you place your siege marker there, and then first thing you calculate the strength of the defender, which is recorded on the appropriate siege track. The British player has 1 and the French player has 1. This is a British siege, so we will use this track. Each location has an intrinsic defense value of 1, which you record on the track. Some locations also have extra defensive value indicated by the number of military symbols printed by the location. Quebec has 2, but this location doesn't have any. A location may also have a fortification if the player built one before the siege, and the fortification gives 2 extra points to the defender. Then the attacker applies the military strength of the card that was played, that is represented by a number of military symbols on the card, in this case 2, and then the marker is moved by 2 boxes towards the British side of the track. Suppose that was the first action in the turn. Then second action, the British player pays 3 money to play this card, and this card allows him to use 3 military symbols, 1, 2, 3. Now the siege marker is on the British side of the track, and that is all for that turn. Then the French player during his turn may play military cards to move the siege marker back to his side of the track, or at least to one of the gray boxes. Because if at the beginning of your turn the siege marker is on your opponent's side or is in one of the gray boxes, then nothing happens, the siege continues. But if the siege marker is on your side of the siege track, then you win the siege. That means that a siege can go on for a long time. Turn after turn, the players play cards that move the marker back and forth, but ultimately the marker will be on one of the 2 sides of the siege. At that point, the active player that has the marker on his side of the siege at the beginning of his turn wins the siege. If the attacker wins the siege, then he gets to destroy the location belonging to the opponent and has a chance to settle in that location. If it is the defender that wins the siege, the defender keeps control of the location. And sieges can be a huge drain on the player's resources because cards that are committed to a siege do not go to the discard pile, go to a specific box, and they're kept there until the siege is over. That means that often players will be playing their best card to reinforce a siege turn after turn. They won't be able to use those cards for other actions, and you will see how that can limit your options. The British player wins the game if he wins a siege in Quebec, the French player if he wins a siege in Boston or in New York. Otherwise, other events will trigger the end of the game. If there are no sieges in progress and a player has captured 12 victory points worth of discs and cubes on the opponent, then the game is over. For that count, discs are worth 4 points and cubes are worth 2 points. If there are no sieges in progress and one of the players has placed all of his cubes or all of his discs on the board, then the game also is over. At that point, you count the victory points that are granted by cubes and discs that have been captured and by control of locations on the board. The victory points are printed by the locations, and if you have a disc in a location, that location is worth twice the points printed on the map. At that point, the player with the highest score is the winner. This game has been praised as a great word game, but I have to say it does not feel like a word game at all to me. It is just too abstract. I can even see how some mechanics have been meant to reproduce historical events. The deck building thing, for example, that is based on the poor communications of the time. You knew that you would get some resources, but you did not know exactly when. The fact that a card is in the deck, but you do not know when you're going to draw it, simulates that. But even if I see these things, the overall result still feels very abstract, still feels pretty much about working with cubes and discs rather than with villages and towns. Also, you could potentially win a game without ever attacking the opponent just by developing your towns and your villages, and that to me again is evidence that this game is not much of a word game. At least does not feel like a word game to me. Doesn't mean this is a bad game, quite the contrary, actually, this is a very good game. This is a game that I enjoyed a great deal. It is a game that has some very interesting ideas. It is really nice to be able to combine cards to create powerful sequences of events. I love the reserve box option that finally makes you more in control of the cards that you get from the deck building, because I love deck building games, but let's face it, there are those moments where you're just waiting for a combination of cards and you never get it. Here you can work towards that combination of cards. I love it. I love how the two sides play in very different ways. It is nice to explore the possibilities that the two sides can offer. There really are different ways in which the two sides work, and it is interesting to explore those. And I also had to say that exploring the game really is a huge part of the experience that I've had with this game. This is not a game that you become proficient in a game or two. It really takes a lot of gaming before you figure out first how the actions really work. That is, what the actions can do for you. The effect of the action is easy, you just learn it from the rulebook, but how you use the actions and you combine them to obtain certain effects, that is a different story. Then you have to figure out the connections on the board. The way locations are connected is not intuitive. You do not figure it out just by looking at the board. If anything, the board is sometimes misleading. When you look at the board, you have the impression two locations are connected. Then you look at the card and you see that actually there's no way to go from location A to location B. So you have to figure out how to go where you want to go. Next, you have to figure out where your resources are. So you have to know where the things that you need are, how you get there, and what actions you need to perform to take advantage of those resources and to get there. As you can see, you really need to play this game 4-5 times before really everything comes together and you become proficient and you play the game well. I have to say, one thing is that I'm a little worried about replay value. I wonder if in the long run the game will start feeling stale, if there will be a point where the map will look too limited, certain sequences of actions will emerge as particularly strong and players will tend to stick to those. I'm nowhere close to that point. I just wonder from looking at what the game is now, if there will be a point where when that will happen. But for now I'm having fun. The friends I played it with all enjoyed it. It was really nice to get to explore and to learn the game together. This is a game that is not a war game by any means, at least in my very humble opinion, but it does deliver what it promised. That is a combination between board gaming and a deck building engine, and to me it does this by being more than the sum of its parts, which clearly is a good thing.